Hi everyone, welcome to our 12th core village in the city. And this time I'm very excited to be welcoming Kay Walter all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska in the United States. And Kay is part of the Hawley Hamlet project, where they've been doing some amazing stuff over the last decade or so in gardening and using a gardening project to build community, as well as, of course, provide themselves with all sorts of interesting flowers and produce. Kay was invited to the project by Randy Bretz, who's also on the call today, and they're kind of colleagues, although in slightly different neighborhoods in Lincoln. And so, Kay, welcome to Village in the City. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing the questions after my talk.
Excellent. Well, we've got, we're going to do the usual thing, folks. Kay is going to speak, and she has some slides and pictures for us for about 20 minutes. There'll be a chance for some questions. We'll have a breakout room discussion, so you can say hi to each other and talk about what you've heard. And then perhaps a chance for some more questions before we close the call. So, Kay, if you're ready to...
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, so this may take just a second. I don't know if I can get the actual... Okay.
If you click on the little thing at the bottom right, the thing that looks
like... I see, just a minute. Here we go. Great.
There we go. So, Kay, take it away, please. Tell us about the Hawley Hamlet.
Okay. Thanks, Mark, for inviting me to speak. And I'd like to introduce you all to the Hawley Hamlet, which is a square block in Lincoln, Nebraska, and offers a model that is being adopted by several other blocks in the city. So in 1986, my husband, Tim, and I bought a house in this older, diverse neighborhood of Lincoln, Nebraska, about 12 blocks from the central business district of the city, and near to my work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For context, I've just retired after 40 years as a professor and department chair in the university libraries, and I directed an interdisciplinary digital humanities center. Tim is director of Nebraskans for Peace, the oldest statewide peace and justice organization in the US, and he'll be retiring this fall. Lincoln itself is a US capital, and it today has a population of about 325,000 people. It's a US refugee resettlement community with over 80 heritage languages spoken. Our neighborhood has pockets of home ownership and many rental units, housing students, recent refugees, migrants, and residents who may not want to own a home or may be unable to do so. Under federal definitions, it is considered blighted due to its low median income levels, and it's considered a food desert. It's several miles to the nearest full service grocery store. For many years, Tim kept a small vegetable garden, only with tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers in our backyard. It was the only such garden in our square block, and we knew the names of about 3 neighbors, a couple across the street, and a realtor. Our professional activities and extended family connections certainly contributed to our unintentional isolation from neighbors immediately around us. But as our careers became established and we became involved in the neighborhood association, we gradually learned the names of a few more people. Shortly before the neighborhood gardening project began in 2010, Tim and I read a book by gardening writer Rosalind Creasy titled Edible Landscaping. He and I talked about the idea of growing food in our yard instead of grass, and shared the book with a neighbor who was really interested in co-housing ideas. Nearby was a problem rental property with an absentee landlord and 8 junk cars in the backyard. We hadn't seen it inside, but the backyard was very deep, about 75 to 80 feet deep, and it had lots of sunshine. With our realtor friend and members of a nonprofit organization called NeighborWorks Lincoln, a group that works with older neighborhoods, helping develop affordable housing and educating first-time homebuyers, we approached the tenants about a furnace survey, and that's when we discovered that the tenants were running an illegal exotic animal operation. There was a caged Komodo dragon, 22 exotic birds, 6 ball pythons, and rats being raised to feed the snakes. And there was an absolutely indescribable stench. So the house itself was really gross, but there was that backyard. So our daughter and I bought it, and it took 2 years for us to raise the money to renovate the house, scrape the gravel off the backyard, and bring in new soil to be amended. This property is now the center of the Hawley Hamlet Gardens. And this is, Anna's house is the red house, and her backyard is the area that I'm talking about. So the small garden on our personal property clearly had not offered Tim the scope or the expertise that would be needed to develop a truly successful cooperative gardening operation. I suggested Tim sign up for a master gardening course through the university's agricultural extension service. This course was quickly followed by courses on composting and beekeeping. Together, we traveled to Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, which is an organic seed cooperative. And we began to make connections with local farmers who were affiliated with the Nebraska Sustainable Agriculture Society. A few years ago, NeighborWorks Lincoln recruited some neighborhood members, including Tim, to attend a community leadership institute in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. After returning, he and the others offered a gardening workshop and a workshop on rain barrels. So as our lawn disappeared and our gardening expanded, neighbors kind of came out of the woodwork to ask what we were doing. Of course, this was an opportunity to learn names and to learn where everyone lived. It was also an opportunity to suggest the concept of edible landscaping. Initially, reactions were very mixed. I would say that some neighbors were wholly uninterested and others were quite excited, especially those who spent their summers mowing their lawns. For those of you who've not been to the US Midwest or Great Plains, most yards are dominated by grass, and there are very few fences between neighbors, so that lawns seem continuous. And you can kind of see that in this photograph. Lawns are typically cultivated with fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides. And although backyards are gathering places for families and may have an occasional fence, the front yards are typically for show. Most rental owners are not interested in plantings as they make mowing more complicated. And the use of chemicals on lawns and the lack of plantings have had a profound impact on insect and bird populations. As Tim and I, excuse me, I got to get rid of this. There we go. As Tim and I learned about the neighborhood, we saw how much potential and need there was for edible landscaping. Addressing food disparities ultimately became one impetus for creating this neighborhood garden. And another impetus was reducing reliance on produce raised far away and trucked in from, for example, California's Central Valley, which is 1,500 miles from Nebraska, or from locales even farther afield. Our reading convinced us that with climate change, the potential for supply chain disruption was inevitable. Time has shown this to be true. By raising vegetables in the hamlet, we're less prone to rising costs at the market, and hamletiers have access to fresher produce. Here are a few hamletiers and actually local growers with our previous mayor. The current mayor, Larian Gaylor Baird, is actually gardening with us in the hamlet. In addition to the property that I mentioned that we had purchased, that my daughter and I purchased, many other neighbors began contributing to the project. And so this kind of gives you an idea of different garden beds that we have. And the very tall grasses that you see there are cereal rye. They're actually cover crops. And so those are kind of what we call a green manure. So some of the neighbors were Lois, and she couldn't get back down on her hands and knees to work soil. And so she offered her yard so that we could grow calorie crops there. Stanley didn't want to mow anymore. He offered us his large corner lot property. Linda and Ed sold their 2 properties to Timothy, who let us set up more garden beds for neighbors. And so you see some of them at the back of this image. John and his grandson designed and built 3 hoop houses for season extension growing. And you see 2 of them here, and I'll show you a couple others. Here's an example of lettuce being grown in the wintertime. And here's another shot of the hoop houses from the side behind 632. This is Susan, who's watering in one of them. And here is a keyhole bed that's actually in a hoop house. Keyhole beds are very handy because you can actually reach everything from different directions, which is nice. As I mentioned, John and his grandson designed and built these 3 hoop houses for season extension growing. But recently we've learned of a house down the street that's going to be torn down, and we've been given permission to take the rafters and windows to build a more permanent greenhouse to replace this hoop house behind Anna's. And John is already developing the plans for that. So others that moved in, Jill had test plots for her horticultural research on Stanley's property, and she worked for a large garden center. So when she moved into the hamlet, she has been a mainstay of a lot of the work that we've done. Also, Grant, a community planner, moved in, and he too is crazy about gardening. So I would say, among all the people who garden with us, I would say there are probably 6 to 8 who are real diehards and very helpful to us. The hamlet has also had interns from the university studying such topics as environmental studies, horticulture, agronomy, and soil science, including 5 students from Rwanda. So ultimately, the gardens look something like this. And this is a map that actually Mark had mentioned that would be good to show. So Tim and I are in the lower right-hand corner. And you see there's a greenhouse attached, which I'll show you pictures of later. And so this is a little dated. So we've had a little bit of change. Linda and Ned have sold their 2 properties down at the bottom and off to the right to Timothy Sweeney, who lives in another neighborhood. So he keeps them as rental properties. In addition, let's see, I think I've read that already. Okay, just a minute. So I want to stress that the hamlet is not an intentional community. Rather, it's a model based on existing neighbors, who you see here, and we're working together and we're sharing. These neighbors run the gamut politically in terms of religious persuasion and also in politics. So we have Trump supporting Republicans, Democrats, people uninterested in politics, which is really saying something in the US today, libertarians, socialists, Muslims, evangelical Christians, Catholics, Unitarians, and people of many ethnicities. And we don't talk about our differences. What we talk about are gardens, food, weather, and an interesting bird that someone has seen. Everyone is interested in food. It's something everyone can talk about. And so that's a great healer, especially in the times that we're experiencing now in the United States. In addition to strawberries in the hamlet, the T-shaped alleyways are lined with blackberries and raspberry bushes. There's some raspberries. making the alleys a very popular ambling walk for children and adults as they pick berries. And so these are a few of the kids living in the area. And I'm sorry, I don't have more recent photos because of the pandemic, but anyway, it gives you an idea that we actually do have children. At the intersection of the alleys, one of our neighbors put up a little library, and that's in the box that you see there. Heather put this up, and she's using a newspaper dispensary box for the library. So on the side of it, it says, take one, give one. And so the idea is that you can keep the stock rotating all the time. Also near the intersection, 4 neighbors constructed a new garden shed to share tools, and we have a large composting shredder in there. Nearby, Tim developed an 8-stall compost corral, and Bob, who works 1 block west, or lives 1 block west of us, volunteered to make the compost, and he had a t-shirt made that says Captain Compost across the front, which I think is kind of charming. Over the years, we planted more than 50 fruit and nut trees in the block, growing apples, pears, peaches, cherries, apricots, Asian pears, hazelnuts, and pecans. There is usually some produce left for humans, though I must admit that birds and squirrels make their very serious inroads into it. A few of us have chickens, which can be kept in the city. Our next door neighbor, Barry, Tim and I currently have barred rocks and Orpingtons, and Heather and Jeff have Leghorns and Rhode Island Reds. A few years ago, our Rhode Island Reds were featured on Nebraska Education Television's Backyard Farmer program. And so these are the movie stars here. So thanks in part, I should also mention there's a small number of beehives in one of the yards. Usually 3 to 5 hives in any given year, depending upon how many honeybees survive the harsh winters of Nebraska and the ever-present threat of colony collapse disorder. Last year, we harvested 80 quarts of honey, shared with neighbors and friends. So over the winter, we lost 3 of our 5 hives, and we were lucky in comparison to many other people who lost a greater percentage than we did. Thanks in part to a grant from the Nebraska Wildlife Federation, the Hawley Hamlet has 12 pollinator plots for bees, butterflies, and birds. So the gardens are literally abuzz with native bees, honeybees, painted ladies, and swallowtail butterflies and monarchs. Sunflowers and coneflowers bring seed-loving birds such as goldfinches, and we harvest whatever seeds remain. We're noticing more wildlife generally, and as you know, we're right in the middle of the city. So we're seeing foxes, raccoons, opossums, among others. In any given year, and here's a water station. We have about 5 of those around the block for birds and other wildlife. In any given year, there are 22 to 28 households gardening in the hamlet proper. While we have many who garden year to year, there's a lot of turnover too, especially among students and renters who've been involved. As I mentioned, we don't use herbicides or pesticides on crops in the hamlet proper. So those without a green thumb or who don't have time to either weed, grow cover crops, or to water their plants may decide not to return. However, they will have met many people, and they will have gained some appreciation for the rigors of gardening and an understanding of where food comes from. Gradually, we all are getting to know one another and each other's skills and interests. So I've got some headings on here that you may want to take note of. Gradually, we're getting to know one another's skills and interests. And some people are setting up their own beds. In fact, in surrounding blocks, many neighbors have begun tearing up their yards for gardens. So Jesse, Brent, Carol, Ben, Addison, and Julie have all planted gardens in part because of the Hawley Hamlet. We call the offshoots Greater Hamlet. Thanks to the garden, vegetables and fruits grown in bulk, such as strawberries, lettuce, potatoes, onions, and green beans, are distributed to neighbors. Of these, strawberries are by far the most popular and lettuce the least, which I don't understand, but there you go. In return, people gift fermented vegetables such as green beans, carrots, and beets, and baked goods and jams to one another. Herbs, strawberries, and various vegetables grown in the right-of-ways are free to anyone who needs, for example, a jalapeno pepper or tarragon for a recipe. In the meantime, I've become very interested in alternative energies and in greenhouses. In 2010, I contracted with a firm to install a geothermal system for our house, and it's actually under the back garden that you see here, and simultaneously worked with the contractor to build an attached conservatory to our home with the tram wall to absorb heat from the sun. As mentioned earlier, we will soon be replacing one of the hoop houses with a more permanent structure using recycled materials. In 2012, I worked with a company to add solar panels to our house, and since then, 4 other properties have added solar panels, and various homeowners are exploring doing so. Recently, Denny, who lives across the street from us, invited a solar company to the neighborhood to talk with people about the benefits of solar. Okay, so finally, a few words about agritourism. We often conduct tours of the Hawley Hamlet for groups, such as the Audubon Society, the Lincoln Garden Club, the State Historical Society, school groups, and NeighborWorks Lincoln. Our largest tour had 250 attendees, and most of them, though, are more in the 30 to 100 attendee range. There are some publications and media about the Hamlet. The city offers a guide to Lincoln, and in past years, the Hawley Hamlet has been featured in that. We have a Facebook page, and Tim's TED Talk X is very popular. There are a few articles in national periodicals, such as Mother Earth News and Yes Magazine, and also some social media sites have picked it up. Allstate's Renewal Project has featured the Hamlet too. So this publicity has resulted in people from other states, such as Kentucky, Iowa, Utah, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, and California, and surrounding communities to visit and to walk or bike through the alleyways. After reading about the Hamlet in Mother Earth News, a woman from California who was attending the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting in Omaha made a quick trip to Lincoln to see the Hamlet. In the following year, she and her daughter reserved a room at a nearby Airbnb. They spent a week gardening and making pickles and jam. Their family plans to start something similar in Oregon, and a friend of ours from Washington, D.C. has started something similar in one of the neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. So one year we had an ice cream social fundraiser for Buy Fresh, Buy Local, featuring a bluegrass band on Anna's back porch overlooking the gardens. We hope to encourage more tourism and events. And now that I'm retired, I hope to spend more time making arrangements and putting by food. So thank you very much. And if there are questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Kay. Wow, what a super presentation. Thank you. And such an amazing collection of things you're doing there. So while people get their questions ready, I have a question to start with.
Okay,
please.
Great.
Which you mentioned right at the beginning. You said you're in a food desert.
Yes.
And that's not really a term I've come across before. When I go to the States, there seems to be food everywhere in vast quantities, although perhaps not the healthiest always. So can you say a bit more about a food desert and what that is?
It actually has to do with grocery stores. So in our neighborhood, we have we have fast food restaurants, and we have a few ethnic food shops, but we don't have any big grocery store that carries fresh produce or anything along those lines. And so it's about 2 miles away, maybe, to the next big grocery store. I would say Hy-Vee is probably the closest to us, and maybe Leon's. Randy will know about of both those. So it's a combination of the food that's available to people. So there's a McDonald's kind of near us, you know, and we find McDonald's wrappers and styrofoam, you know, kind of littering around the garden. Tim spends a lot of time picking up litter.
Yes. Okay. Wow. So getting fresh vegetables, for example, and fruit is not straightforward.
Right.
Necessarily. Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's so interesting. So there's really nothing to connect people with fresh food at all. Not even that it's it's in the store. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Folks, who has a question, please? I can see everyone. So let me give you a wave. Gemma, hello. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, Kay. That was amazing. Thank you. I'm a passionate gardener. I've do a lot. Do you know what allotments are?
Yes. In fact, we have something like that in Lincoln. There's a group called Community Crops, and you can make arrangements to have what you would call an allotment in order to garden. What's different, I guess, about the hamlet is that it's right here. It's right in people's backyards or front yards. So go ahead. What's your question?
It's not really a question, just to say how inspired I am, because like you say, my allotments are kind of on an allotment site, and separate from the neighbourhood. And I'm trying to get a sort of a village in the city project going in my street. And I think you've inspired me to kind of go for that a bit more, because we have a sort of a food desert, in so much as there's not, wherever you go in the local area, you can't get fresh vegetables because they're all going off, you know, and you can fast food and things. And the road I live on, there's some people have got some beautiful gardens, and then other driveways are kind of covered in concrete. People are very kind of, unlike in America, people are very segregated. They kind of keep to themselves, you know, great big fences between properties, etc. But I thought the photographs were really beautiful. So are you kind of organic, would you term?
Pretty much. We're not requiring people not to use herbicides or pesticides, but when we teach them without it. And the other thing is that if you have a lot of diversity in your crops, that helps prevent pests from, you know, attacking, though, of course, the Mexican bean beetle is going to be here in July, no matter what. And so we've learned that you do multiple plantings through the summer. So you start out, you have the beans and the bean beetle hits, but you keep planting. And when you keep planting, you outlive that particular pest. So it's things like that we've been teaching people. And I think that's helping them understand you don't need to use chemicals.
I'm more organic, completely organic as well. And I liked how it kind of, other little projects came out of the gardening project. For example, the library is a lovely little idea, which is inspiring as well. So just see if there's anything else I want to say. No, but just thanks very much. That was really inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Gemma.
much.
Thank you, Gemma. Other questions, folks? Thoughts, observations, things to think about? Randy.
I don't know the answer to this question, but I think it would be interesting to hear Kay share it. There's a space between the sidewalk and the street that the city considers that it's the city's, although we're supposed to take care of it. How did you negotiate with the city to be able to plant vegetable crops there?
Well, actually, they don't restrict what's in what we call in the States, we call it the hell strip, because you've got usually concrete on either side. In our block, 2 of the sides have 25-foot right-of-ways. And so technically that space belongs to the city. And so it's so far, 25 feet is so far away from our houses that we just kind of started growing there, right? And the other thing is that we have been very careful to let city government know what we've been involved in. So for example, Tim will take potatoes and strawberries and honey to members of the city council, to members of the city planning commission. And we have at this time 2 city council members and the mayor who were so excited that they ended up deciding that they wanted plots in our hamlet. And so we gave them to them. And so we're not really having any trouble with the city because we're working with them. The other thing is there used to be a requirement that you couldn't grow taller than 30 inches in the city. And a number of our native plants do grow taller than that. But the city, I've noticed, is also growing things taller than that. They're doing native plantings downtown, and some of those can be quite high.
What's the mayor got planted in her spot?
Mostly cold crops, broccoli, chard, kale. I think that's mainly it right now. And so when they're ready, if she doesn't come by, Tim will take it by.
Thank you. On that subject, Terry, I think he has something to say, which was also in my mind. But Terry, go on. You say what you just wrote.
I will, but forgive the noise of children having fun in the background. They're not mine. There are some people, in fact, I heard one of our local councillors say recently, I'd actually rather ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yeah, we kind of did that. And I think that's a great idea. So we know of another couple in another area that are trying to start something similar. And Jackie contacted me and said, well, we're thinking of sending a letter out to our neighbors to tell them what we're going to do. And I said, don't do that. Just plant things, particularly the native plants that they were planting. Go ahead and do it. And they'll see how beautiful it can be. And then that will start influencing others to do the same thing.
That's such a great point, Kay, and it also reminds me in the same vein. There's a movement here in the UK called Be More Pirate, who I like very much. Which is they have a book which is quite good, and Be More Pirate. I mean, just do it. Seek forgiveness rather than ask for permission. Be bold. I thought it's a great spirit, and if you're doing it in a good heart, I think starting to ask for permission, and you're right, it gets you into all sorts of troubles. Barbara from Northern Ireland has a question. If you just want to unmute yourself.
Yes. First of all, thanks very much, Kay. That's really inspiring and uplifting. As part of that, the training where I met Mark was there's a lady I met there, and she's running a community garden right in the middle of an area with low educational attainment, high unemployment figures, and things like that. And there are people having raised beds and having bits, and someone in the shop owns some chickens that run about and things like that. And it's open 24/7. They have had some trouble with some local kids who are a wee bit naughty now and again and come in and they've pulled up some of the plants. And the day I went to visit, I was talking to one of the guys there and saying, well, you know, what this would have been their space maybe before you came and put the garden there, and you know, it's maybe about empowering that. So I was almost the opposite, because I teach play work and I'm very much, you know, about children are as valuable a piece of society as any. 25% of our population in the UK is under 18. So, but you don't see them. So I thought about partnerships, and I know I had a student in another part of town who has a partnership with a community garden where she takes her after school children periodically and they plant things and they do things. So I'm wondering, first of all, have you any difficulty with vandalism, as they say, and do you have partnerships that involve children, or is it an older population? What would your experience be?
Yeah, well, I mentioned obviously that we have trouble with litter. We also recently have a guy on a bicycle who will sometimes ride through the hamlet and steal tools. So we have to kind of keep an eye on that. The people who have children may not tear up their yards because the kids need a place to play, right? And we're right across the street from a small pocket park, and we're about 4 blocks from a big city park. So it's actually by the Malone Center. Randy will know what I'm talking about, Trago Park. So we have places where kids can do that. I would say that, yes, we're becoming an aging population. Our ages probably range from about early 30s up to about 75. So in terms of things for kids to do, the schools here oftentimes have school gardens, and so kids are exposed to that. And some of our neighbor children have helped, and you saw the one picture of the kids with a bunch of squash around them. And so they came over and asked Mr. Tim if there was something they could do, and so he kind of put them to work on it. And so I think they're very engaged, but they're also a little bit maybe astonished by the changes to the neighborhood. And so I can see that one way maybe of getting the children involved is to actually invite them to help with the gardens. I mean, and I think that rather than seeing them as, you know, hoodlums or anything like that, ask them if they would like to. I mean, and we did have one little girl who was living in an apartment complex near here, and she came over and she was all excited. She wanted to help in the gardens. And then we discovered she wanted to be paid for it, and we don't pay anyone. And so her interest was totally lost. But if there's bribery involved, if you can say, oh, we're going to grow strawberries, you can have strawberries, or we're going to be growing green beans, and maybe your mom would like some green beans. Something like that might make a difference. I don't know. It's a hard nut to crack, and I wish you really well on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kay. I think, yeah, the community garden on the other side of the town works well because they involve the children, but I think there's a big disconnect between the one that I visited recently and the local children. One of their houses backs right onto the community garden, so they climb over the wall in, and you know, but I think a lot of it is attention, and they would want to be involved, except the people who are there don't know how to do that. So that's why I'm thinking that could be my role then, try and get them productively involved. Thank you.
Yeah,
No.
Terry made a nice comment, and that was figure out a competition. Who can grow the biggest and the best, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too. That's always worthwhile.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, folks, we always like to have a chance for people to get together on these calls. So we're going to go to a 8-minute breakout room session. Groups, random groups, 3 or 4. Say hi to the people there. Talk about your response, what struck you from what Kay was saying. Any thoughts you might have about your own situation, and just have a good time speaking to each other. So 8 minutes, and then we have a chance for a couple more questions probably at the end of the call. So off we go to the breakout rooms, please. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that was an interesting time for you in the breakout rooms. So we have chance for more questions or things that emerged in your conversations, anything that might be interesting. I can see everyone, so give me a wave if you'd like to say something or just unmute. Terry.
Just to say, we didn't actually particularly talk about gardens, interestingly, but we got very much into the conversation around creativity and realized that all 3 of us in the room actually take creativity into the community. And it's such a fantastic way to get people involved, apart from competing the size of your strawberries or whatever. It's a really good way to get people doing things. So maybe that's a way to get young people doing things in the area as well. I don't know, maybe for example, murals somewhere, yes. Doing mural walls, things like that as well would be interesting, because young people love doing that, especially if they're taught how to do it really well.
Yes, I was struck with what Kay was saying about teaching people. It's not just gardening, it's sort of teaching and involving and expanding and talking to people and connecting with other things like the bees and the different aspects. That's really interesting. Gemma has her hand up. Gemma.
Yeah, I was just saying that gardening, there's so many elements to it. I mean, I regard my gardening as an art form as well. And also we were talking to Brian about psychotherapy and bringing that into communities and education, and what better thing than gardening to help with mental health and connecting people to the earth and each other. So I think so many things that gardening kind of encompasses, creativity and education wise.
Yes, and people think gardening is a very therapeutic thing. I think there's an old saying I heard once, which is grass doesn't grow faster if you pull it, which is an interesting thought. There's something about gardening where you can't just tell it what to do. You have to kind of nurture it and encourage it, and it'll do it on its own in the end, maybe. Barbara, yes. Oh, we can't hear you. Can we? Can you hear Barbara, everyone?
No, Barbara, mute.
No, she's unmuted, but for somehow you're... Oh, it looks like your microphone has come adrift or something, Barbara. Do you want to write it in the chat or try and do a running repairs? We'd love to hear from you, of course. Jenny, have you?
Just again, some of the aspects of gardening that we were talking about, possibly allied to mental health. It's a continuous activity. You can do it any time of day. It's not like you have to turn up at a particular time. And it's a very equalizing activity. You know, we're all in it together. There's no, well, there may be an expert, but the expert could be anybody. You know, it's a very democratic thing. And the fact that it's about food, can be about food, is just, you know, everybody. It gives you so much to share in all sorts of arenas, physical, mental, social. Lovely.
Yes, thanks, Jenny. On this side of the pond in the UK, we have a movement called Incredible Edible. I've just put the detail in the chat, and they've got over 150 groups in various stages of doing community gardening type of activities. And their slogan is, if you eat, you're in, which I think is very nice and very, very inclusive. So worth, if you're in the UK listening to this, worth having a look at Incredible Edible. Just Google it, you'll find them easily enough. And they're founded by a lady called Pam Warhurst, who did an amazing TED talk, which I was lucky enough to be in the audience for, about the project about nearly 10 years ago now. And a well worth 10-minute TED talk, well worth digging out if you want to have a look at that too, on the similar kind of topic. So Barbara is saying in the chat, school link could be very important. I've used my garden to deal with anxiety, and I know that even in a small space, I have things to see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. Schools seem to be keen on mindfulness, and this is an obvious link. That's a great idea, Barbara. Yes, a sort of mindful gardening, and the garden offering a space to do all sorts of things. So everything from running around to really being kind of quiet and attentive and mindful. What a fantastic idea. So folks, we're coming towards the end. Other questions, other thoughts, please? Terry, again.
Sorry, it's me again. A couple of things. One, there is a gentleman who had his own, almost like a wild garden in Eastbourne, and the council didn't like some of the stuff that he was doing, so they tried to close it down. The hullabaloo from the local public was extraordinary. So I think it has remained open because he used it as a wild garden to teach children and things in. So I think it is now been, I don't think it's going to, I think they're going to look at the health and safety and the risk assessment for it instead. But the other thing I was just thinking about is the BBC are running a thing about bees at the moment, and it's kind of like, it's really nationwide, and there are competitions and things going on, and just educating people about how important bees are, which is something that you brought up, Kay. And I was just wondering if perhaps your city could do something similar through the radio station there, or something like that, just to get kids. One of the things that they're doing is they're asking children to design a garden that's specifically to encourage bees, and then what is going to happen is that the winning garden will actually be made into a proper garden somewhere really important, but I can't remember where. But it's, yeah, so they're going to have horticulturalists actually making the garden for these kids. I'm just thinking that might be quite a nice idea as well to get young people engaged.
It's a nice idea. I like that.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Terry. Last chance, folks, for a question before we wind up for today. Okay, so I'd like to thank very much indeed Kay and for bringing her story of the Hawley Hamlet to Village in the City. It's been absolutely super. Great pleasure to have you with us, and we hope we can continue to communicate and connect and share ideas with you, Kay. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been fun.
And those who were on the call yesterday will be familiar with my bicycle theory of progress, which is you have to keep your project going by having the next event lined up at the end of the last one. So in the link now is the booking for our next call, which is not till September. We're having July and August off from doing these calls, but in September, very excited to welcome Nigel Gann, who is one of the leaders of the Lichfield City of Sanctuary movement. And they're very keen to make Lichfield a more hospitable city to refugees and other folk who end up there. And not everyone in Lichfield is very keen on that. So Nigel is former head teacher, educational consultant, very, very good guy. And he has some interesting things to say about how to make your community hospitable and the importance and the value of that. So that is on the, oh dear it is, it's the 20, I can't find it now. It's the 22nd of September. 22nd of September is our next call. And of course we have our Village Builders call next Wednesday. For those who'd like to join that, members of our community, it's an open agenda call. We bring our questions, we bring our challenges, we bring our thoughts. And we support each other. So if you want to join that call as well, 4 o'clock next Wednesday, details in our community, which you can find, those of you who don't know about the Village and the City community. I'll also put that link in the chat so you can discover that if you want to. and windows in the way here. There you can join the Village in the City community, which is kind of interactive space that we have, where people like Gemma and Terry and David are very active members. So thank you to Kay. Thank you to you all for coming. We've come to the end of today's call. Bravo to everybody. And the host is both the first and the last, so I'm going to be the last off. If anyone wants to hang around, ask me a question or talk to me about anything, please feel free. But that's the end of the call for today. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.